Thank you for joining Wars of the Roses. As we continue with Part 4, Lao-tse from the Adepts in the Eastern Esoteric Tradition by Manly Palmer Hall. Part 3, The Sages of China. Lao-tse. Everything about Lao-tse is mysterious and obscure. It is assumed that he was born about the year 604 BC and was therefore a contemporary of Pythagoras. He was born of humble family and some say under a peach tree. Miraculous events announced his birth, especially a great comet and a similar hairy star foretold his departure. With the rite of metaphysical speculation in Taoism, this obscure sage was given a highly glamorous personality and was believed to appear to mortal disciples in their dreams and visions, and also to participate in various adventures relating to alchemy and the activities of the Eight Immortals. The picture in general is so confused that some cautious writers have doubted the historical existence of Lao-tse. There seems to be, however, good ground for assuming that this eccentric sage was a real person who so conducted himself that legends and myths soon accumulated around him. For example, Professor R.K. Douglas, quoting from an earlier source, makes several interesting observations concerning the various place names associated with Lao-tse. By translating the involved Chinese glyphs, it would appear that Lao-tse was born in a village named Oppressed Benevolence in the parish of Cruelty, in the district of Bitterness, and in the state of Suffering. It is curious, certainly, that the various names can be fitted together into so convenient and suggestive an arrangement, and it seems evident to some that such birth data should be regarded as allegorical. This does not necessarily follow, however, as each of the Chinese character compounds involved is susceptible of more than one translation. According to one Taoist tradition, the appearance of Lao-tse during the decline of the Zhou dynasty was his 10th incarnation. It is possible that the idea of the 10th incarnation is of Hindu origin and should be associated with the 10th incarnation of Vishnu, which was supposed to occur in the future and to constitute the coming of a world teacher or avatar. In later Taoism, there is an entirely different report concerning the previous embodiments of Lao-tse. About the year AD 1230, there was friction between Buddhists and Taoists as the result of a series of paintings representing the 81 incarnations of Lao-tse. In this sequence of pictures, Buddha was included as one of the embodiments of the venerable Taoist adept. The Buddhists were properly indignant, but the case was ultimately dismissed. The Manichaeans were also involved in this curious situation by intimating that Manes, the founder of their sect, was likewise an incarnation of Lao-tse. According to E.A. Gordon, the Nestorian stone, a Christian monument in China dated AD 781, speaks of the rider on the green cart horse who, ascending to the western heaven, left men without moral guidance. He believes that this is a reference to Lao-tse. The version of this monument reproduced by Kesson does not contain this precise statement, but it is pointed out that due to the nature of the original, it could be subject to several variations. Professor Pelliot discovered in 1909 a book at Chow Chow entitled The Sutras, explaining Lao-tse's ascension to the Western Heaven and his being reincarnated in the land of Hu. Gordon believes this to mean Persia, and he feels that the text implies that Lao-tse was reincarnated as Jesus Christ. It has been noted that several early church fathers considered the doctrines of Lao-tse as a primitive Christianity belonging to the descent of that pure religion necessary to salvation, to which St. Augustine refers and which he says existed from the creation of the human race, but was more fully developed by our Lord in his gospel. Lao-tse himself is credited with the statement that the learned do not usually know Tao, and that it is revealed to babes, the simple ones. Therefore, with a childlike spirit, in the privacy of the intimate life, one must seek Tao. It is only revealed to the restful spiritual heart, and whoso gaineth it, though he die, perisheth not. Such statements as these, so close to the wording of Jesus, could scarcely be completely denied or ignored in view of their wide dissemination among the Chinese mystics. Perhaps the one point that stands out is the early interrelationship between religious teachings. It is inconceivable, for example, that so close an understanding should exist on certain levels, and not at the same time be present in other relevant and equally important doctrines. The motion of early Christianity toward China should not cause one to lose sight of still more ancient contacts between the Occident and the Orient. For example, India could not have been unaware of the mystery systems of Greece and Egypt after the celebrated journey of Pythagoras in the 6th century BC. Nor can the cultural interchange resulting from the campaigns of Alexander the Great in the Far East be limited totally to art and architecture. Any doctrines of importance which reached India would ultimately have penetrated into China, and conversely, the spiritual and philosophical treasures of the Chinese are known to have been disseminated in areas as remote as Persia. The recognized intercourse between Persia and the Mediterranean countries is known to have led to esoteric schools flourishing in Antioch, Ephesus, Tarsus, and Alexandria. There are therefore vestiges of a total world concept of religion on a comparative basis long before recent European man became aware of the widespread foundations of mysticism and esoteric philosophy. From the available records, it would appear that Lao-tse was a mystic and a quietist, teaching a completely informal doctrine entirely dependent upon internal contemplation. Man attains to truth by the complete relaxation of error within himself. The mystical experience consummates the quest for reality. Lao-tse wrote, "There is an infinite being which was before heaven and earth. How calm it is, how free. It lives alone and changes not. It moves everything, but it is not affected. We may regard it as the universal mother. I know not its name. I call it Tao." Such contemplation is not different from the inner teachings of the Indian mystics or the old Jewish Kabbalists, or for that matter from the instructions of Jesus, who promised his disciples that the pure in heart shall see God. In the Tao-te King, the master writes, "The sage, therefore, is occupied only with that which is without prejudice. He teaches without verbosity, he acts without effort. He produces without possessing, he acts without regard to the fruit of action. He brings his work to perfection without assuming credit, and claiming nothing as his own, he cannot at any time be said to lose." In the 7th section, the master writes, "Thus the wise man, indifferent to himself, is the greatest among them, and taking no care for himself, he is nevertheless preserved. By being the most unselfish, he is the most secure of all." The curious mysticism of the master is expressed in section 21. "I am but a waif, tilled astray, a child without a home. All others have an excess of good things, but I am as one abandoned. How foolish and simple am I! I am bewildered, everyone sparkles with intelligence. I am alone in my obscurity, the people are full of discernment. I alone am dull, I am tossed about like the ocean. I roll and am never at rest. Everyone has something to do. I alone am incapable and without merit. I alone am estranged from the people, but I glory on the breast of my mother." The closing section of the Tao-te King concludes the philosophy which the master left to his world. "Sincere words are not grand. Grand words are not faithful. The man of Tao does not dispute. They who dispute are not skilled in Tao. Those who know it are not learned. The learned do not know it. The wise man does not lay up treasure. The more he expends on others, the more he gains for himself. The more he gives to others, the more he has for his own. This is the Tao of heaven, which penetrates but does not injure. This is the Tao of the wise man, who acts but does not strive." It is evident from these and similar teachings that Lao-tse could not be easily understood by those of worldly inclinations. Even his own followers gradually departed from his simple way and through countless interpretations attempted to clarify his basic teachings. These very commentaries obscure the original meaning, and by degrees his doctrine was made to sustain attitudes entirely inconsistent with the original intention. Yet it may be affirmed that Taoism was and still is the principal school of indigenous mysticism among the Chinese. It has always been to them an escape from the formality of the Chinese life way. It survives in the arts of the people particularly, and has exercised a sensitive but relentless pressure upon Chinese culture and tradition, impelling men to obey heaven and to mold their conduct upon the simple ways of nature. According to Sima Qian, who had some standing as an historian, Lao-tse was curator of the royal library at Luoyang at the time of his celebrated meeting with Confucius. In the year 517 BC, Confucius, and then a young man of 33 years, paid a ceremonial visit to Lao-tse, then a patriarch of 87 years. The original intention of the meeting was to have a discussion of ceremonies, But the conversation quickly took a different vein. It should be noted that the details of this visit rest on very slender foundation, and it is quite possible that the account, if not created at a later date, was considerably colored by the differences which distinguish the two sects. Actually, there is nothing to disprove the possibility of such a meeting, but the ethical and philosophical implications strongly suggest that the story is intended as a statement of doctrine rather than merely the human contact of two distinguished scholars. Confucius, with his characteristic regard for the proprieties, took a most respectful attitude, giving to the older man all the deference that his years and distinction required. Confucius was certainly sincere in his desire to learn. He told Lao-tse that he had sought truth from the beginning of his career with no other motive than that he might be serviceable to both the state and the people. Lao-tse is said to have acknowledged the respectful greeting of the younger man rather brusquely, saying, "Those whom you talk about are dead, and their bones are molded to dust. Only their words are left. Moreover, when the superior man gets his opportunity, he mounts aloft. But when the time is against him, he is carried along by the force of circumstances. I have heard that a good merchant, though he have rich treasures deeply stored, appears as if he were poor, and that the superior man, though his virtue be complete, is yet to outward seeming stupid. Put away your proud air and many desires, your insinuating habit and wild will. They are of no advantage to you. This is all I have to tell you." Actually, it appears that the two philosophers had several discussions, but unfortunately their words have not been preserved. Lao-tse is said to have remarked, "If the Tao could be offered to men, there is no one who would not willingly offer it to his prince. If it could be presented to men, everybody would like to present it to his parents. If it could be announced to men, each man would gladly announce it to his brothers. If it could be handed down to men, who would not wish to transmit it to his children?" The old sage then explained that Tao cannot be so communicated, nor can it be transmitted through the eyes and ears or the other outer senses. It can be known only to those who are capable of receiving it into their own hearts. It comes from heaven, it is given by heaven, it is received by the heaven-loving, and it is known to the heaven-knowing. As Confucius was about to depart, Lao-tse is reported to have said to him, "I have heard that rich and noble persons make parting gifts, but people who are neither rich nor noble but are good give sincere words in farewell. I am neither rich nor noble, but I am held to be a good man, so I will give you these words to take with you on your way. Shrewd and clever people are always near to death, for they love to criticize and pass judgment on others. Those who know a great deal about practical affairs and do things on a large scale endanger their persons, for by their actions and their knowledge they reveal the mistakes of mankind." Confucius, visiting Lao-tse to discuss the proprieties, listened also to the music of the ancient master from the Shantung tablets. Later, Confucius, with his accustomed honesty, related his baffling experience with the old master of Taoism. He made no effort to minimize the criticism which had been directed toward him, nor did he claim to understand Lao-tse. He simply said, "I know how birds can fly, fishes swim, and animals run, but the runner may be snared, the swimmer hooked, and the flyer shot by the arrow. But there is the dragon. I cannot tell how he mounts on the wind through the clouds and rises to heaven. Today I have seen Lao-tse and can only compare him to the dragon." Lao-tse's criticism seems to have been turned against what he considered the intellectual emphasis which distinguished the Confucian method. Actually, Confucius made it clear throughout his teachings that he was not an originator, and that he made no claim to any superior kind of knowledge. He admitted that he was not so constituted by natural temperament or requirements that he could penetrate into the mystical substratum of human consciousness. He also admitted that there were universal mysteries utterly beyond his understanding, and, had he the time, he might well devote it to the study of the I Ching and other recondite subjects. He believed that there were certain immediate and necessary ideas and concepts which men should come to know and apply. If these obvious and natural remedies were ignored, society would fail, good government would perish, and the people would fall into dire extremities. There are numerous inconsistencies in the accounts bearing upon the closing episode in the life of Lao-tse. The historian Qian is authority for the account of Lao-tse's final departure through the Northwest Barrier Gate. This is hard to reconcile with the narrative contained in the third book of Chuang-tze, who wrote in the 4th century BC. He described the death of Lao-tse and the crowd of mourners who gathered on this solemn occasion. The story as preserved by Qian is, however, the most widely circulated, and whether literal or allegorical, is certainly the more meaningful. The beauty of the narrative and the dramatic situations which it suggests have become essential parts of Taoism and are therefore well entitled to be included in the present survey. 25 centuries ago, Yin Shi, an old soldier and scholar, was the keeper of the outer barrier gate of China, which was known as the Way of Compassion that opened to the northwest toward the great desert called Gobi. This Yin Shi has been reported to have followed the teachings of Lao-tse, and he was a master of signs and omens, could devise magical figures, knew the secrets of the star, and was gifted with mystical perception. According to tradition, this old gatekeeper regarded Lao-tse as a heavenly light moving upon the earth. He was therefore profoundly impressed when, from his place of lonely vigil, he observed a luminous sphere which appeared in the sky, moving over China from a southwesterly direction and finally vanishing behind the great mountains that rose beyond the desert. Regarding this as an omen of the highest importance, Yin Shi consulted the ancient books which dealt with the secrets of the immortals, and concluded that a very wise and noble human being was to follow the motion of the mysterious light, and might well come to the northwest gate. To prepare for this event, Yin Shi built a hut of grass and reeds to await the coming of the great sage, and seating himself in the doorway, watched the road that led back into China. In due time, the vigil of Yin Shi was rewarded. He saw approaching him along the twisting dusty path a huge greenish-black ox. Riding this clumsy animal was a strange little old man with long white hair and beard huddled in the folds of a cloak of coarse cloth. Yin Shi, because he was gifted with inner vision, immediately knew in his heart that this was the scholar for whom he was waiting. As Lao-tse approached, the gatekeeper hastened toward him, and, performing the most profound obeisances, humbly requested the sage to rest for a time and share tea with him. Lao-tse graciously consented, and when they were comfortably seated in the hut, Yin Shi said, "You are about to withdraw yourself out of sight. Let me insist on your first composing for me a book." With some persuasion, Lao-tse agreed and remained with the gatekeeper long enough to prepare the Tao Te King, the only literary work of China's immortal mystic. The writing consisted of 5,000 characters arranged in 81 chapters, each exceedingly brief. The complete book was also divided into 2 parts, the first concerning Tao and the second concerning Te. In this usage, Tao signifies the unmanifest nature of absolute being, and Te, the revelation of this universal power through the unfoldment of objective creation. According to the historian Sima Chi Yen, Lao-tse, after setting forth his principles in the Tao Te King, presented the work to the keeper of the gate and then went his way, so that it is not known when or where he died. Thus ended the historical record of the venerable sage who liked to keep himself unknown. Some say that, tired of the burden of the world, he went forth to die. Others, inclined to mystical speculation, insist that he sought the city of the Adepts, the pleasant garden of the wise by the mountain Quen Lun. The Kingdom of Lu by Maurice Magret contains a beautiful and reverent description of Lao-tse's last journey. The account is a masterpiece of mystical understanding. While it is doubtful that some of the statements can be sustained by reference to history or the Chinese annals, there is nothing unreasonable or improbable in the substance of the narration. According to Maurice Magret, Lao-tse had perceived by the mystical extension of his faculties that other men were alive in the world who shared his secret of the way. He had learned from a disciple that in India a good and holy teacher had renounced wealth and a kingdom to serve in absolute humility the spiritual needs of his fellow men. There was also a great philosopher who lived in a city of white marble by the shores of a blue sea. His name was Pythagoras, and he also served the light of the world. Writing of Lao-tse's vision of the blessed place beyond the desert, the author of the Kingdom of Lu says, "Through the valley wound a peaceful river along whose banks grew lotus flowers larger than he had ever seen. A cedar, taller than the rest, which stood in the middle of the valley surrounded by a circular bench of carved stone, was the only indication that the place was inhabited. An impression of security was diffused from this silent spot, causing Lao-tse to think that it must be the dwelling place of those perfected men, guardians of lost wisdom and secret directors of the human race, whose existence had been made known to him by the old traditions. "Into the valley come my two brothers," said Lao-tse, "the man from India and the man from the country where there are marble temples at the edge of the blue sea. That is where I must go." In the 7th century AD, Lao-tse was canonized by the reigning Tang emperor, being elevated to the estate among the divine creatures of the world with the title, the Great Supreme, the Emperor God of the Dark First Cause. To this was later added the final honor of being known simply as the Ancient Master. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe and comment. And if you can, please consider donating to Wars of the Roses. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.